I want you to take a second and just picture your absolute favorite movie antihero. Like, bring them really clearly into your mind.
Oh, that is a fun way to start.
Right. Maybe it's Arthur Fleck in Joker doing that slow, eerie, yet strangely captivating dance down those concrete stairs.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's Neo in The Matrix, dodging bullets in slow motion and basically breaking every single rule of the simulated reality he's trapped in.
The classic ribble.
Exactly. Or, well, maybe going back a bit further into classic literature, it's the incredibly charismatic, like silver-tongued portrayal of Satan in John Milton's works. The question is, why do we root for the rebel? Why do we find their defiance against the system, against their fate, against, the very fabric of their reality so beautiful and captivating?
It's a magnetic pull. I mean, we are culturally conditioned to be drawn to that defiance, right? To elevate it as the absolute peak of human expression.
And that exact question is at the heart of our deep dive today. We are looking at a really fascinating document from Nakhoda Publications, and their logo actually captures the spirit of this perfectly. It's a ship's steering wheel intertwined with a pen, bearing the motto, "The pen is mightier than the sword."
Which, tells you immediately that we are dealing with ideas meant to steer civilization. They aren't just passively commenting on it.
Yeah, exactly. So this text explores the views of the prominent Islamic thinker, Professor Syed Naquib Al-Attas. Specifically, we are focusing on his concept of tragedy in Western civilization. Our mission today is to unpack his highly critical, deeply profound perspective on how modern pop culture, literally the movies, books, and shows you and I consume every single day, how they actually shake the architecture of our souls.
But before we get into the mechanics of his argument, we really need to set some crucial context for you.
Yeah, that's important.
This source material contains very strong, highly specific religious and philosophical viewpoints operating from an Islamic framework. And as your guides on this deep dive, our goal is strictly to report, to unpack, and to analyze the ideas presented by Professor Al-Attas impartially.
Right. We are just the messengers here.
Exactly. We are not here to endorse these viewpoints or, to dictate your beliefs. Rather, we are offering you a window into a rigorous critique of Western media. It's a lens that will absolutely challenge you to look at the entertainment you consume in a completely different way.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to understand why we idolize a rebellious anti-hero today, we first need to look at how the very concept of a tragedy has fundamentally transformed over time. I mean, it hasn't always been about the leather-clad rebel sticking it to the man, right?
Right. No, it hasn't. If we look back at ancient times, so think classical Greek tragedies like Oedipus Rex or the great works of Shakespeare, tragedy was fundamentally about fate, sin, and human limitation.
Yeah.
In those classical stories, humans suffered because they crossed boundaries. They let their pride, their hubris, basically drive them to transgress limits that were set by the gods, or just by the natural order of the universe.
So in the ancient world, watching a tragedy was essentially supposed to remind you of your place in the universe. Like, you watched a king fall from grace because he thought he could outsmart the gods, and the takeaway was basically, don't be like that guy.
Precisely. The suffering on stage taught the audience a lesson about their own dependence on a higher power. It was this communal reminder of human frailty.
Makes sense.
But Al-Attas points out that as Western civilization moved through the Renaissance and into the Enlightenment, the entire philosophical center of gravity shifted.
Because God was sort of pushed out of the picture.
Yeah, God was slowly pushed out of the center of the universe, and human reason and human will were placed right there on the throne.
Well, if the human is now at the center, then the stories we tell about ourselves, they have to change to reflect that new hierarchy.
Which is why Al-Attas argues that modern Western civilization has flipped the concept of tragedy entirely upside down. Think about it. When you remove a higher power, the only thing left to worship is the human will.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, therefore, defining and defying limits is no longer seen as a sin. It becomes the ultimate virtue. Instead of highlighting human weakness, modern tragedy exalts humanity. Suffering, and specifically rebelling against fate, against an oppressive society, or even against a creator, is now celebrated as heroic and deeply meaningful.
So classical tragedies were essentially cautionary tales to keep our egos in check, teaching us our limits. But modern tragedies are more like instruction manuals for rebelling, teaching us that crossing boundaries is the only way to be, like, truly significant.
They have absolutely gone from cautionary tales to instruction manuals.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the most piercing part of Al-Attas's critique.
Which is?
Well, if modern tragedy is an instruction manual for rebellion, we have to ask, what is the underlying philosophy actually being taught to the viewer?
Because nobody sits down with a bucket of popcorn to watch a superhero movie thinking, I am being indoctrinated with a new philosophical framework right now. They just want to be entertained.
Right, exactly. What's fascinating here is how the source describes the mechanics of this hidden education. Al-Attas argues that Western art is beautifully and meticulously wrapping what he calls the spirit of Iblis.
And Iblis is Satan in Islamic theology, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Now, we have to define what that means in this specific context. In the Islamic framework, the spirit of Iblis doesn't just mean generic evil or doing bad things. It fundamentally represents a very specific type of intellectual arrogance. It's known as kib.
Kib, okay.
And it's an outright refusal to submit to God's decree.
Right, because in the theological story, Iblis refuses to bow to Adam when God commands it. He argues that he's made of fire and Adam is made of clay, so he is superior. It's an intellectualized rebellion, like, I know better than the system you've set up.
That is the exaved archetype.
Yeah.
It is the original assertion of the ego over divine command. In Islam, this intellectual arrogance is considered the greatest possible disgrace.
But the West views it differently.
Entirely. Western philosophy and art, according to this text, take this exact same template of rebellion and repackage it under incredibly beautiful, noble-sounding names. We call it humanism. We call it existentialism. We call it individualism or liberty or freedom.
Oh man, so it's like a philosophical Trojan horse.
Yes.
We download this concept into our brains. We tell ourselves, I'm learning about the triumph of the human spirit, or I'm exploring the boundaries of personal freedom. But the source argues we are actually infecting our minds with kibber, with profound arrogance. We are completely unaware that we are basically cheering for the exact psychological traits that are associated with the devil.
And the danger Al-Attas highlights isn't that this media is visibly ugly or horrifying, like it doesn't look evil. The danger is that it has been made to look intellectual, sympathetic, and just breathtakingly beautiful. The cinematography is gorgeous, the dialogue is sharp, the musical score swells at the exact moment the character defies the heavens.
It gives you goosebumps.
Exactly. The viewer is praising the defining traits of Iblis while wiping a tear from their eye, entirely oblivious to the spiritual poison they are absorbing.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because we need to ground this theory in the actual media we consume. Like, how does this Trojan horse manifest in the stories that dominate our culture right now? I know the text gives some very specific, high-profile examples.
It does. It walks through a timeline, starting with classical references and moving right up to modern blockbusters.
Okay, let's hear them.
Take the Greek myth of Prometheus. He steals fire from the gods to give to humanity, and he is chained to a rock to have his liver eaten by an eagle for eternity.
A pretty heavy punishment.
Very.
Yeah.
But the West elevates him as a supreme symbol of brave rebellion. He is celebrated specifically for refusing to submit to the divine hierarchy.
And then you have John Milton's Paradise Lost. The text points out that Satan is portrayed with so much charisma, tragic depth, and oratorical power in that epic poem that readers for centuries have found themselves secretly, or maybe not so secretly, admiring him far more than they admire God.
Which is exactly the phenomenon Al-Attas is warning about. The packaging is so brilliant, it subverts the morality. But we don't just see this in 17th century poetry. The text explicitly points to modern cinema.
Like a Prometheus movie.
Yes, Ridley Scott's 2012 film Prometheus. You literally have humans traversing the galaxy searching for their alien creators, only to turn against them in violent defiance.
Or look at Oppenheimer, which just swept the cultural conversation recently.
Oh, that's a perfect example.
Right, you have the creator of the atomic bomb framed as this monumental, tragic icon. The film wrestles with the fact that he unleashed a power capable of ending the world, but it structurally forces you to sympathize with his torment. He is elevated by his carrying of this godlike burden.
Then consider Joker. Arthur Fleck is crushed by an uncaring, oppressive society. But the film frames his descent into madness and extreme violence, not as a cautionary tale of a soul collapsing, but as a twisted form of self-actualization.
Right. The societal rebellion makes the madness look justified. The audience leaves feeling that society deserved his wrath.
Exactly. The text also calls out the Matrix, which is arguably the foundational modern myth for millions of people today.
Oh, definitely. The whole concept of freeing your mind and taking the red pill is essentially the spirit of refusing to submit to the system controlling your destiny.
Yes. You even have Dune, Part 2, where Paul Atreides clearly sees that his path will lead to a holy war and mass starvation, but he steps into the role anyway. He's portrayed as a tragic hero forced by circumstances to embrace a dark destiny.
But I need to push back here, though. Let's really look at these characters. In almost every single one of these examples, the protagonist suffers horribly.
They do.
I mean, Arthur Fleck's life is a waking nightmare. Paul Atreides is deeply tormented by his visions. Even Neo dies and is constantly brutalized. If the underlying goal of Western art is to make arrogance and rebellion look appealing, why drench it in so much pain? Like, if I'm supposed to want to be arrogant, shouldn't they show the arrogant character living a great, easy life? Why does this intense suffering make us admire them more?
You've hit on the exact mechanism that makes the Trojan horse work.
Really? How so?
If these characters rebelled and everything went smoothly for them, they wouldn't be heroes. They would just be lucky, or perhaps bullies. The suffering is the sweetener that masks the poison.
Wow, the sweetener.
Yes. By showing a character enduring immense, crushing emotional or physical pain, the filmmaker hacks into your natural human capacity for empathy.
So our own compassion is being weaponized against us.
That is the perfect way to phrase it. The art uses your natural human compassion to validate their arrogance. You watch them bleed, you watch them cry out in anguish, and your heart naturally goes out to them.
Because we're human.
Exactly. The suffering elevates the rebellion from a simple act of selfish defiance into a quote-unquote noble sacrifice. You are tricked into sympathizing with the kibber, the arrogance, because it is wrapped in tears and tragedy. You think you're feeling pity for a suffering human, but you are actually learning to revere their refusal to submit.
So if you spend 2 hours in a movie theater or, thousands of hours over a lifetime pouring your empathy into these rebels, what is the long-term side effect on your psychology? I mean, we are downloading this operating system over and over again.
According to the text, the effect on the human soul is subtle, quiet, but devastating over a lifetime. It creates a slow calcification of the heart.
Calcification? Just hardening.
Yeah, every time you watch a film that celebrates this kind of defiance, your internal compass shifts a fraction of a degree. You are being trained to love what you should naturally reject.
And the text mentions a very specific spiritual quality that we lose in this process, right?
Yes, it highlights the loss of tawadu, which translates to profound humility. It is the ability to recognize your own smallness in the grand scheme of creation and to submit gracefully to it.
Okay, so losing that humility.
Right. And in Islam, there is a foundational pillar of faith known as Kota and Qadar, which means destiny and divine decree. It is the belief that God has ordained all things, and ultimate peace is found in submitting to that decree.
But these movies teach the opposite.
Exactly. Al-Attas argues that modern audiences struggle immensely to accept their own destiny because they have been conditioned by thousands of hours of screen time to idolize heroes who violently fight their destiny.
Think about it like a steady diet of emotional junk food.
I like that analogy.
Yeah, if you eat nothing but ultra-spicy, hyper-flavored, deep-fried junk food every single day, eventually the physical structure of your palate changes. Your dopamine receptors get completely fried. You need a bigger explosion of flavor, a sharper spike of salt and sugar just to register that you're eating something. And if someone then hands you a perfectly ripe piece of fruit like something naturally nourishing, it's going to taste incredibly bland to you. You won't even be able to perceive the subtle flavors.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that palate destruction is exactly the spiritual decay Al-Attas is warning about. When you are overstimulated by dramatic rebellion and high-stakes defiance, the nourishing natural taste of simple obedience, humility, and quiet peace becomes painfully boring to you.
Because it doesn't have that dramatic spike.
Exactly. You start to view people who are patient and content as weak or naive. You lose the true awe of the Creator because you are so addicted to the awe of human defiance. Your soul becomes fundamentally restless, totally uncomfortable with the very concepts that are designed to bring you peace.
This brings us to a major crossroads. If Western art is this hyper-flavored, emotional junk food that's quietly eroding our capacity for peace, what does Al-Attas propose as the alternative? How does he define true beauty if it's not found in these massive emotional swings?
To grasp his alternative, we first have to understand the flawed goal of Western emotional release, which the text identifies as the concept of catharsis.
Right, catharsis. Tracing all the way back to Aristotle, who believed watching a tragedy purged the audience of negative emotions like pity and fear.
Yep, that's the origin.
And it was later championed by thinkers like Karl Marx, who saw that emotional friction as, necessary for revolutionary progress.
Yes. Catharsis is that feeling of exhaustion and relief
Hmm.
you get after watching a deeply heavy, tragic movie. You cry for 2 hours, the credits roll, and you feel a strange sense of being cleansed.
Yeah, we've all felt that.
But Al-Attas sees this as a profound deception. It is only a temporary release of passionate, worldly emotions. It's exactly like punching a heavy bag when you're furiously angry.
Okay.
You might feel a temporary physical relief because you exhausted your muscles and spiked your adrenaline, but the root anger, the underlying spiritual disease in your soul, hasn't been addressed at all.
Hmm.
In fact, you've just exercised your aggressive passions and made that neural pathway stronger for the next time.
But I have to challenge this. I mean, doesn't catharsis serve a healthy psychological purpose? If I have real-world grief and I watch a character like Paul Atreides suffer immensely, doesn't that help me process my own pain? Doesn't it make me feel less isolated to see suffering depicted on screen?
It might make you feel less isolated in your worldly pain, sure, but Al-Attas would argue it tethers you entirely to the material world. Catharsis manages the symptoms of a restless soul, but it keeps the soul focused on its own ego, its own pain, and its own defiance against that pain.
It traps you in yourself.
Precisely. It never lifts the gaze upward. The Islamic alternative he presents is tazkiyah, which means the active purification of the soul.
So how does art achieve tazkiyah instead of catharsis? What does that look like?
According to Al-Attas, true beauty in art does not come from generating powerful drama, inciting conflict, or eliciting extreme, tragic emotions. True beauty brings sakina. Yes, that is a profound, deep tranquility to the heart. True art shouldn't make your heart tremble with anxiety or feel restless or get excited about tearing down a system. It should make your heart feel pure, settled, and intimately close to the Creator.
Wow, that is totally different standard.
It is. It is designed to elevate the Ruh, the eternal spirit, rather than feeding the nafs, the lower ego, and its endless demands.
Which fundamentally changes the definition of a happy ending, doesn't it?
Entirely. The West pursues temporary pleasure, which is always derived from external things. The hero defeating the villain, winning the war, achieving worldly success. But true happiness, in Al-Attas's framework, is permanent and internal. It stems from Marifatullah, which is the deep spiritual knowledge of God.
So it's not about winning the external battle.
No, not at all. That kind of happiness does not depend on external conditions or winning a conflict. That's why he is so critical of art that relies on friction and rebellion. It trains the heart to thrive in a state of agitation. True art must train the heart for create an absolute contentment with divine will.
So what does this all mean for us practically? Like, can we just take the structure of a modern blockbuster, let's say a massive superhero franchise, and just, I don't know, sand down the rough edges? We write the script, but we make the hero a little more polite, we ensure there's a solid moral lesson at the end about being kind to your neighbors, and we avoid outright rebellion. Does that fix the problem?
Al-Attas' solution is completely uncompromising on this point. You cannot just tweak or fix Western art.
Not even a little.
No.
Yeah.
You cannot take the narrative structure of a Marvel movie and slap a moral Band-Aid on it. The very foundation of that storytelling, the need for a powerful individual to exert their will over the world to solve a problem, is corrupted by that spirit of kibra. You cannot put a fresh coat of paint on a rotting foundation and expect the house to stand.
You literally have to change what makes a hero a hero. You have to invent an entirely new artistic paradigm.
Yes. He calls for the Islamization of knowledge and art. This means actively rejecting the foundational premises of Western civilization's approach to tragedy and rebuilding storytelling entirely from the roots of Tawhid, the absolute oneness and supremacy of God.
So the whole focus shifts.
Exactly. In this pure form of art, the primary purpose is not to glorify the potential of man, but to constantly remind humans of their reliance on the Creator.
I am trying to visualize what that actually looks like on screen or on the page. How do you write a compelling story if the main character isn't fighting against external forces to assert their dominance?
The conflict shifts entirely inward. The main character wouldn't be a rebellious anti-hero conquering the world. The story would likely center on a character conquering their own nafs, their own ego.
Ah, okay.
The heroism would be demonstrated through tawadu, humility, and graceful submission to circumstances they cannot control.
So if a tragedy occurs in the story, let's say the protagonist loses everything they love, the narrative climax isn't them swearing vengeance against the heavens or like gearing up for a final battle.
Exactly. The climax wouldn't be a defiant rejection of fate. The emotional peak of the story would be their realization of their own smallness, leading to an increase in faith, patience, and ultimate contentment with the divine decree.
That is beautiful, but so different from what we're used to.
It is. You wouldn't leave the theater feeling your pulse racing with the thought, life is suffering, I must fight back. You would walk out into the sunlight feeling a profound, quiet sense of peace, a realignment of your priorities, and a closeness to ultimate truth.
We have covered some incredibly dense and provocative ground today. We started by looking at how our modern entertainment landscape, the billions of dollars poured into blockbusters and streaming series, might actually be a subtle, invisible education system.
An education system we don't even realize we're enrolled in.
Right, a system that actively, meticulously trains our dopamine receptors to love arrogance, to celebrate defiance, and to reject our own destiny, all while wrapping this spiritual poison in beautiful intellectual words like freedom and heroism.
It is a total inversion of values. Through this media, the arrogant are portrayed as strong, visionary leaders, and the humble, contented souls are portrayed as weak, passive background characters.
So the next time you sit down on your couch to watch a new movie, or you put on your headphones to listen to an album, or even if you crack open a highly acclaimed new novel, ask yourself a very simple diagnostic question. Is this piece of media bringing sakina, tranquility, and peace to my heart? Is it making me more humble, more patient, more content? Or is it quietly, beautifully training me to admire rebellion, feeding my ego, and making me feel like I constantly need to fight against the reality I've been given?
I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, building on the sheer scale of what Professor Al-Attas has argued here. Imagine if we actually succeeded in his vision. Imagine we created this entirely new, pure form of art. Media that is completely stripped of the spirit of Iblis media that offers zero dramatic rebellion, no defiant anti-heroes, no adrenaline-fueled vengeance, but only brings profound tranquility, humility, and stillness.
That sounds incredible.
But here's the question. Would our modern conflict-addicted brain even be able to recognize it as art anymore? Or has our cultural attention span been so permanently rewired by the intoxicating friction of rebellion that we are quite literally no longer capable of being entertained by peace?
Wow. That is a fascinating and honestly deeply unsettling question to sit with as we go about our day. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
It has been a true privilege. Until next time.